to debate one of the perennial questions in civilization, one that's existed at least as long as ancient Athens, the question of what is the good? My colleague Brian Caplan will be arguing that liberty is the good. He's associate professor of economics at George Mason University. Like myself, and like Dr. Hanson, he's a native Californian. He received his BA in economics at UC Berkeley and his PhD at Princeton. And he's author most recently of The Myth of the Rational Voter. Arguing in favor of efficiency is my colleague Robin Hanson, associate professor of economics at George Mason. He likewise studied in California, BS in physics at UC Irvine, MS and MA in physics and philosophy at Chicago, and a PhD in economics at the California Institute of Technology. So our format will be quite simple. Each will have 10 minutes to speak, and then the two of them will have a free-for-all for roughly 40 minutes. And so which I will serve as moderator with power to stop debate and switch sides, change discussants at any point. And then after about 1 hour total, we'll open it up for questions from the audience with the prerogative for my own questions first. We'd like to get a sort of a snapshot of how this debate affects your thinking. So I believe you've all been handed out cards. And if you could, we'd like you to take a position on which you think is the good right now, based on your views coming in. So if you think that liberty is the primary value that modern society should focus on, place an L on there. If you think efficiency is, then just place an E on there. Now, just use the definition that you think sort of educated people would use. That's why I made just a small note card, because I know that GMU students in particular could fill up, pages just defining the terms, and it's a valid exercise in many cases, but not today. L or E is all you get. And we'll do a similar vote at the end, and we'll tally up the results to be reported on the internet tomorrow.
Eric, how do you know the difference between before and after votes?
They're going to be collected in different envelopes. So after you give your vote right now, please hand your ballots down to this aisle right here. Just place them along the aisle, and we'll have somebody come and pick them up. This aisle, so pass them along. And they'll be kept in separate envelopes. That'll be our voting. How did you decide who will be first? All right. 10 minutes to Professor Hanson. Yes, let's go.
Good evening. I'm Robin Hanson, as they introduced, and I'm going to tell you about efficiency versus liberty. First of all, let me try to be clear on a few things. I do love liberty. I like efficiency too. They're highly correlated. So this is about when they conflict, what do we do then? What I mean by liberty, which I think Brian will agree, is some sort of minimal government or other interference in your choices, some sort of wider scope of choice or freedom. And by efficiency, I mean what academic economists usually mean as a standard measure of, for evaluating policies, a standard criteria, somewhat abstract criteria for evaluating policies, which attempts and often somewhat succeeds at neutrally weighing the consequences for different people. I like liberty, and as a person, as an individual, I may well choose liberty, I may well fight for liberty, I may well die for liberty. But I'm here not as me, I'm here not as your therapist or your priest, I'm here hoping to be your economist. And what that means to me is that there's a particular role that an economist can fill in society, a noble and ancient and hopefully with a grand future role that I want to fill, and that role is well filled by using the concept of efficiency. So, where is this role played? What is the point? So, humans, people have conflicts. They have choices to be made where people conflict, and they could either just not do anything or fight, or they could sometimes make a deal. And if they make a deal, they have to think that the deal's in their interest. And where I see economists playing an important role is in recommending deals, recommending outcomes that people can choose over conflict or doing nothing. When they need to make such a deal and they are trying to figure out whether to accept a deal, they need to have advisors they can trust to tell them whether a deal's in their interest. Advisors who can cut through the complexity and make a recommendation to them about what to do. So the question is, where can they turn for such advice? Economists have played such a role, do play such a role, and can play such a role, and can do so even better if we work harder at it, by having a deserved reputation for neutrally advising a group of people on how they can make a deal that would be in their mutual interest. These can be, of course, business people trying to organize a business, families trying to settle disputes. They can be nations trying to choose laws, nations at war trying to settle severe conflict, a wide range of conflicts. Economists have developed this concept of efficiency, which is one of our pillars in being able to be this neutral advisor. The concept of efficiency literally, it's technical, I'll just briefly mention, it is literally that for each person and some possible deal, some possible alternative scenario, we estimate the dollar amount they'd have to be given in order to be indifferent between whether that's a good deal, whether they like that deal or not over some status quo or reference. And we add those up for different people, and we get a measure of sort of the total dollar value of this deal. To the extent that we can identify individual dollar values, we could recommend that not only do we do the deal, but that we compensate people for it. But we'll have error both in measuring the overall value of the deal and in measuring the individual value for the deal. We recommend not only that you compensate people for individual losses or gains so that everybody can benefit, we also recommend that we think of packaging lots of small conflicts into one large, what I'll call meta deal, where we make a commitment to saying we will consistently follow the following rule across many topics, and on average, we expect that everybody will benefit if we consistently follow the same principle across lots of things. And so efficiency is this idea that if you consistently analyze situations for who's benefiting, who's winning, and who's losing, estimate that as best you can, and follow the policy of taking the action that seems to increase the size of the pie the most, and consistently follow that across many topics, compensating when possible, when you know, that on average you can have reasonable confidence that most everybody will benefit. And that's the kind of thing economists can offer to people. We can say, if we do a good job here of estimating these things and making suggestions, you can trust us to give you advice about what to do for your mutual benefit. Of course, the main problem isn't so much that we make errors in good faith, as that we'd be in bad faith, we would make mistakes, not just because we misunderstood something, but because we're biased or partisan, I'll call it. So economists can be partisan. And the main reason you should distrust economists' advice is that we are, in fact, partisan. That is, we are not giving you our best estimate neutral advice about what to do, but we have been bought out by somebody, we are allied with somebody, and we're giving you biased advice. That's a good reason to be suspicious of economists. It's a good reason to hold them to high standards, to ask how confident they are, to get checks on them, and it's a good reason not to believe everything they say, everything we say. Nevertheless, as an economist, I want to try to live up to the standard. In my role as an economist, as trying to offer people advice about how best to make deals to find mutual advantage, I want to try to live up to the standard of offering fair, neutral, consistent advice about doing my best to analyze who's affected and coming up with a net weight of the benefit of some deal so that I can try to live up to this ideal. And even if you shouldn't always trust me or my colleagues when we recommend things, you should embrace the ideal, at least, that we're trying to live up to. which is that you want advice that's telling you what deals are in your interest and in the interest of other people in your conflict so that you can avoid fighting in conflict and choose peace and choose mutual benefit. So the dispute here is going to be about, in my mind, the dispute is about for economists in their role as economists, offering advice to people, what is sort of the standard we should hold up as our standard of giving advice. Now, instead of doing a complicated analysis of some problem, we could instead rely on heuristics and recommend to you that you rely on heuristics. So in particular, we could say, for example, just always do whatever the tall guy wants. That works. It's a simple heuristic, easy to measure, easy to monitor, easy to always follow, but it's a lousy heuristic for actually settling conflicts because the tall guy will always like it and everybody else won't, and you won't come to us for advice. You'll just ignore that advice and go on with your conflict. Maybe we could recommend that you have a majority rule and decide what the majority wants, and that on average will be better than the tall guy, but it won't be so great because there are a lot of standard ways in which a majority rule answer, the sort of answer majority would want, differs from what the group could agree on. That is, perhaps the reference outside option is not a majority option that the majority would accept. Or you could have this heuristic liberty. And I've got to say, relative to the other very simple heuristics, liberty is a great one. If you say, well, just in general, pick the policy that has the greatest liberty, I don't actually know of another very simple heuristic, easy to measure, easy to follow, that would do better than that, on average, at even achieving efficiency. And if all you can do is learn one heuristic and apply it, and that's about all you can even trust us to tell you, then maybe that's what you should use. But know that, in fact, liberty isn't always exactly the best way to achieve efficiency. There are ways in which you should accept deals, you should accept compromises of your liberty so that you can all achieve the ends that you want. And these are sort of standard issues in economics of market failure, and the failure to coordinate, things like that. So that for somebody who's trying to do a careful job of analyzing policy to make a recommendation about what somebody could do in a context where there's any remote chance that they might be trusted to actually give useful advice, I say, take the standard of liberty, shoot a little higher, try to do a little better, and actually suggest something that will give people what they want more than liberty would. Try to achieve efficiency. This concept of efficiency is based on the idea, again, as I said, of a numerical value that people would give about how much they'd sacrifice for something. It's basically measuring how much they want something. It's a concept describing how much they want something. And it's, in a sense, potentially different from what they think is moral or what you think is moral. And in my role as an advisor, I don't think it's my place to tell other people what is moral for them to do. It makes sense for me to give them what they want because that's what I would want from them. I want them, as somebody else as an advisor, to give me what I want, to tell me how to do something in order to get what I want. And so that's how I will love others, by giving them advice that gives them what they want. And if loving them this way is wrong, I don't want to be right.
Okay, let me start with a disclaimer. Despite his moral views, Robin Hanson is an incredibly nice, decent person. It wouldn't hurt a fly, but to know Robin is to love him. You know, Robin Hanson, you complete me. Right, nevertheless, Robin does endorse an endless list of truly bizarre moral claims. For example, over lunch, he recently told me that the main problem with the Holocaust was that there weren't enough Nazis. The main problem with the Holocaust is that there were not enough Nazis. All right, so after all, the idea is that there have been 6 trillion Nazis, each willing to pay $1 for the Holocaust. And on the other end, there were 6 million Jews, only willing to pay $100,000 each to prevent the Holocaust. When you go and add up those willingness to pay, turns out the Holocaust gave the world $5.4 trillion worth of consumer surplus, so is therefore recommended by efficiency. Okay. Or let's consider another example. Suppose we got a world where the only people are Hannibal the millionaire, a slave trader, and 10,000 penniless orphans with no job prospects. Okay. All right, so the slave trader is no direct use of the slaves. On the other hand, Hannibal is a ravenous cannibal. Okay. Now, according to Robin, the optimal outcome is actually for Hannibal to buy the 10,000 orphans and eat them. All right, now, if you've ever taken a class of moral philosophy, you've probably heard weird examples like this. Okay. And normally, examples like this lead people to back away from their pet moral theories. People say, okay, well, I don't mean that. Right? What I've said except for that. Okay? However, Robin's devotion to efficiency is so strong that it'll actually bite absolutely any bullet you present to him. I've tried. No matter what I offer, he just eats the bullet. I'm left. Right? What can I do? I can take it to somebody else. Okay, look at what this guy's saying. Okay, so the most that Robin will really say in his own defense is this. He says, look, merely serving as an advisor to help people get what they want is all that I'm doing. Just serving as an advisor, just helping people get what they want. Okay, but the fact remains that if you've given the preceding examples, he will advise genocide and cannibalism. Seems strange. Okay, so frankly, I think that these grotesque counterexamples reveal a fatal flaw not just in what Robin is saying, right? They actually show a problem in all one-sentence moral theories. Right? All one-sentence moral theories are actually wrong and are subject to counterexamples like this. Right? So it's absurd to latch onto some grand abstract moral theory and then defend it against every counterexample and eat any number of bullets that someone cares to offer you. Right? So what can we do instead? Well, here's my proposal. Sensible moral reasoning begins with concrete, specific cases. For example, it would be wrong for me to walk over to Robin right now and punch him. That would be wrong. Okay, and then from there, we can start to generalize. So for example, it would probably be wrong for me to walk over to any single person in this room and punch them. Probably. Okay, now at the same time, we can then immediately note some exceptions. For example, if Robin had consented to box me, say, then it would no longer be wrong for me to go over and punch him. In fact, it would probably be wrong for me not to try to punch him, because I'd be defrauding everyone who came here to see a boxing match. Right, now, how far can you actually get with this approach, beginning with simple, concrete cases and moving from there? You can actually get very far. Because one very straightforward moral generalization is that it's normally wrong to start threatening physical violence against others. Another is that it's usually wrong to take other people's property without their consent. Right? And I would say, even children understand these norms. And so when we tell children, use your words. Don't hit people. Use your words. We also tell them, don't take things that don't belong to you. Also commonly said to children. So now what's interesting is on reflection, these norms are equivalent to the libertarian principles of respecting the life and property of others. Now, isn't libertarianism just another abstract moral theory that is subject to all kinds of devastating counterexamples? If you take it as an absolute principle, then yes, absolutely. So right now, every single person in this room is shooting carbon dioxide onto other people without their consent. So you are violating other people's property rights right now, every single one of us. Right? So, and if we were to go and take libertarian principles as absolute, then we'd have to do something about this and stop breathing. Right? Stop doing it. All right. Now, note, however, that what I said, I didn't say it was always wrong to do these things. I said it was normally wrong to do these things. So I said it is normally wrong to violate the liberty of others. So if you've got a good reason to violate liberty, I'm actually open to it. Right? So in this sense, I am in some agreement with Robin in being willing to discuss exceptions and counterexamples. I have no problem with that. Right? So I'll say, for example, we will all die if we stop breathing is a pretty good reason to keep doing it. It's pretty convincing. In contrast, a reason that some people will often give for government action, like most of us want to rob them, is embarrassingly bad. Right? Not convincing at all when you really think about it. And now, this is my view. Why in the world do you study economics? You may notice I haven't really said anything about economics so far. Well, my answer is this. When someone says there's a good reason for regulation or tax, we can use economics to see whether or not the story holds water. Okay, so, for example, someone says that we need to restrict the liberty of American consumers to buy Japanese goods in order to present the total destruction of the U.S. economy. One thing we could say is, why don't we go to the textbook and see whether that is a standard prediction about what will happen if we fail to impose a tariff. Okay? The same applies when someone says that it would be more efficient if we were to, say, raise taxes and then spend the revenue on education. Same idea. Right? So maybe the economics will check out, And then we're going to think more about whether or not the reason that someone is given is actually good enough. Right? Is the reason that someone is given us to violate liberty actually good enough or not? Right? On the other hand, though, I think more often, the economics does not check out. The economics does not actually check out. And this allows us to avoid violating the liberty of another human being for less than no reason at all. Right, now, if you were to ask me, so can you prove that your moral view is correct? Now, I could answer your question with a question and just say, well, can Robin prove that his view is correct? But I'm not going to take that way out. Right? That is a cheap exit option. I'm not going to do it. The strength of my position is precisely this. I'm not offering you a phony 17-step argument for why murder is wrong. Right? Something that philosophers like to do. So you go to philosophy journals, you read all kinds of odd arguments where the conclusion is something completely obvious, and then the argument is 17 steps, no one of which is obvious, and then you can get published for that. I think that is absolutely ridiculous. The whole point of an argument is to start with a premise that is well understood and known, and then move to a non-obvious conclusion. Trying to come up with arguments for things that are obvious to begin with is quite beside the point. Okay, so instead what I'll offer you are concrete specific cases where morality is obvious, and then I'm willing to reason from there. Okay, so I don't have a mathematical formula like Robin has, of the sort maximizing the sum of total social willingness to pay. Right, so I think that's okay. And unlike Robin, I'd rather be vaguely right than precisely wrong.
All right. Well, now we can open up for a direct discussion. If one of you has a... Robin, I think, would get the first right to a question here.
Work?
Yep.
All right, so at one level, our most fundamental difference in what we're saying here is about what we're claiming at all. So I didn't pretend, again, to be your preacher or your priest or your therapist. If there's a group of people who have a conflict who need help resolving it, I don't even recommend that they see a priest or a therapist who advise them about their deep moral qualms and issues. And I think they need to find a deal. They need a neutral advisor who will help them in a neutral way to find a deal. Brian respects economists because they have sort of standard structured ways to calculate things, as he says, that they, in order to see if a story holds water. But in order to have a standard structured way to calculate the consequences of policy, we do pretty much need some standard mathematical, simple, formal way to summarize our rough best guess about whether a policy is good or bad. That's what efficiency provides. It does a decent job. I don't see you suggesting an alternative for that role. So would you actually object to the use of efficiency as it typically is used in that role?
Yeah. Robin, I'm very puzzled by what you keep saying. Of course, we've had this conversation a number of times. It seems to me that when you advise someone to do something that is bad, you are, to a large degree, endorsing what they're doing, and you are serving as a preacher. You're the preacher saying, yes, go ahead and do the bad thing. It's good. Now, so this distinction you keep trying to draw between just a neutral advisor rather than a preacher, I think you are a certain kind of preacher, although a very strange one where you say, look, I'm not going to pass any judgment on whether or not someone is trying to murder anyone or whether someone is a cannibal. Let's put all that aside and get to something that's really important, the willingness to pay. I just don't see that makes any sense. So in terms of what economists should do, I have no problem with economists doing efficiency calculations. If you want to do cost-benefit analysis, that's fine. What I object to is the final step where you say, now we figured out what maximizes the sum of benefits over costs, let's do that. Right? Or let's do that, or how about you guys do that? That's the problem that I have. I don't see that last step where you go from the computation to actually recommending anything to anyone makes sense.
So I actually blogged this morning about 1,200-word essay trying to summarize my position here, which Brian has read, where I go into more detail as economists are familiar with the sort of technical concepts. But the key argument here is not that efficiency is just a nice, convenient formula, is that efficiency is a good and probably the best heuristic we know for getting to what's called Pareto optimality, a situation where everybody benefits from a change. And so if, in fact, that is the best heuristic we have for achieving Pareto optimality, then I can argue from the point of view of Pareto optimality and say when we've got a group of people with a dispute and we want to advise them, it's great to be able to say, if you follow this procedure, you will all be better off from your point of view relative to where you started or some other reference. That's the sort of strongest basis to argue for this, saying, you could all be better off. That's better off from their point of view, given what they want. And Brian might say, well, what they want is to eat babies, and that's terrible. You should stop advising them on that. And then, of course, we can ask whether babies are part of negotiation or not. But I actually haven't seen any economist ever in the situation of advising a trillion Nazis whether or not to kill a billion Jews. So that's a relatively hypothetical, pretty extreme scenario. Are there any more familiar scenarios that you object to? Or do we have to go that far out?
No, the point of examples is just to show that a standard is wrong. And so I can come up with one counterexample that's clearly where your position is clearly incorrect. I've done my job. But just to back up, so if you want to get the full lecture on Pareto versus Calvert's efficiency, you can go and sit on the first lecture of my PhD micro class or my graduate level public finance class. What Robin was saying is actually clearly wrong. So, it's important to me, there's this distinction between Pareto efficiency, this is a condition which is not possible to make one person better off without making another person worse off, versus Calvert's efficiency. This is one where we maximize the total value of what it is to pay. Okay, now, there's the key difference here is that if you propose something and there's a single being alive, right, or actually Robin will even include dead people, but we'll just stick to people who are alive. A single being alive was worse off than the Pareto standard says, look, you were already at the optimum. Right? And it's not a Pareto improvement to do it if there's a single person who objects. Okay, so in fact, there is a great gulf between Pareto efficiency and Calvert's efficiency, contrary to what Robin's saying. Now, Robin does have a standard response to this, which in many others not, and many other comments said, so look, well, over the long run, if we just do whatever maximizes the total dollar value of social resources, then everyone will be better off. Well, I'll say maybe more people will be better off, but everyone? There's a whole lot of people on Earth. There's like 6 billion people. Every single one of them is going to be better off if we follow Robin's prescription rather than, say, not following Robin's prescription. There's got to be some people who would be far worse off if we pursued efficient policy. So just think about, say, Kim Jong-il in North Korea. Right now is a very sweet deal. He rules over 20 million slaves and looks like he can do anything that he wants. And if we were to adopt more efficient policies, he would be thrown out. Now, Robin could say, well, we're going to compensate him. Well, actually, Calvert's efficiency does not recommend compensation if there's some transactions costs, which there always are. And so, bottom line, I think Robin is actually sliding between two different efficiency standards. If he's using the Pareto one, then the correct answer is everything is Pareto efficient always. Because in a world of 6 billion people, there's always at least one weirdo who will object to any change. And if he's doing, on the other hand, if he's doing Calvert's, he can't get to there from Pareto. So what he's got left is I can endorse the standard, or I don't know, just saying whatever is fine.
So this is a pretty technical point, which we're going to lose most people in the audience if we go too far into. I think the issue is, so first of all, there's the issue of ex ante versus ex post. Expected beforehand versus after the fact. So the argument is strongest in terms of expectations beforehand. It's saying, if you had a long sequence of policies and you were going to follow a consistent rule, could you have a good reason to know ahead of time that you would consistently lose across all of these policies so that on average you would lose? It's much easier in that case to have Pareto optimality because you could have enough ignorance that you wouldn't know that you were going to happen to be the president of North Korea and the rule would go against you in that case. So the whole point is that you could reasonably not know all the details, and therefore averaging over the details you don't know, you could reasonably expect that the rule would benefit you. That's sort of the idea of averaging over and talking about expectations ahead of time. There's also sort of, I think there's a general cultural difference between Brian and I. I came from a more engineering hard sciences background where we're comfortable with the idea of approximating, with taking expectations, with knowing that there's going to be some noise and some fluctuations, and trying to get close, but not expecting to get exactly there. So that's the spirit in which I'm talking here about trying to raise the probability that most people, the vast majority of people, benefit. I think you can reasonably get there. Getting to some logical situation where you guarantee that absolutely everybody is sure to benefit, and there's no possible information set where you could ever possibly lose, that's crazy. That would be a crazy standard to uphold.
Well, that is actually the standard that you've literally defended. If you want to change your position, that is fine by me. It is just trivial to give examples where even given the fact that we are ex ante right now, there are some people who are going to lose. So Kim Jong-il already knows he's the dictator of North Korea. So there isn't some question, well, am I going to be the dictator of North Korea or not? Who knows? He knows he's there, so he's already in that position. So to come along and say, let's go and do something that's efficient, which wouldn't be efficient if you didn't know that, to say, well, why should I do what's efficient if would be better for me if I didn't know this when I do know it? Right? Or you could just say, suppose there's someone who's very old. Right? So they just don't have enough time for things to average out for their benefits. Once again, Robin's standard isn't going to work to make everyone better off. Now again, if Robin wants to say, well, isn't really everyone better off, it's like vast majority better off, then I'd actually like to get a number, right? So it's like 95% of people have to be better off, 90% of people have to be better off. What actually is the number? Again, if it came down to this, then it might wind up approximating liberty. Of course, it would go because you would need to get the consent of so many people to do something that so many people would have such a high percentage of people would be better off. It would be almost impossible for government to do anything. Well, again, if you take the status quo from where we are, then that means it's impossible to get rid of anything either.
I'm just not sure I'm following here. So maybe we could have somebody else help us out. So I see you you're giving these extreme examples, like way off on the tail of the distribution of events, a trillion Nazis or the cannibals or whatever. And I'm trying to talk about ordinary, familiar situations where real people actually have to make real policy judgments. And I'm saying there's this whole real community of people called economists who actually have a way they've coordinated together to make calculations and try to advise people on their policy. And they have this recommended standard that they're using as a way to compare policies. And that I'm saying they're doing a good job of this. This is a good thing that they're doing. I embrace this. I want to be part of this community. I want to do this. I think you should all say that if there are people who are doing this and calculating these things about your problems, these are great people for you to go to get advice about what deals you want to accept or not in the real world about real problems. And that's the way in which I embrace efficiency, is to say it's a great heuristic to use to recommend to people how to solve their real problems in the very wide range of ordinary cases. And you're saying, well, maybe there's some mathematical boundary condition it doesn't quite get, and then you give me these extreme examples way off in the tails, but what do you recommend to do in the middle of the distribution, if not what I'm saying?
Let me see if I can tighten that up a little. So Brian, can you, over the normal range of U.S. domestic policy issues, where is an issue where there's a conflict between liberty and efficiency, where you come down on the side of liberty?
How about censoring atheists? There's a very small number of atheists. A very large number of people find their activities offensive. Right? So I think it's very plausible efficiency would say shut them up. Right? And I don't think we should shut them up.
There's a lot of atheists.
Well, there's a lot of people, but they are a small percentage of the population. Certainly people who actually want to talk about it are a small percentage.
So you think the willingness to pay of the non-atheists would, they'd be willing to pay enough, and the atheists would be like, hey, we just can't come up with the cash, so they'd get bothered.
Yeah, let me go this way. If the cost-benefit analysis came out that way, I wouldn't say that's impossible.
Well, see, if I'm an atheist and I've estimated the value of me speaking up about my atheism to be, $100 a year, and they come up with a new tax policy that says, okay, we're going to change the policy if I can speak about that, and I get a tax break of $200 a year, I'll sign on.
How about if they say, but again, how about if they just say, look, no tax break, we're doing it. Right? And that's efficient. In fact, it's more efficient than doing your thing because you're wasting money arguing about the tax law.
Well, if we're going to be selective, if they're going to just pick this one case to say this is efficient, let's do it, that's different than a consistent policy of doing the efficient thing over hundreds or thousands of cases. I'm saying I'm happy to endorse the policy of consistently following that rule, because even though I lose on the atheism end, I expect to win on 500 out of the other 1,000 of these policies at least, and on average I'll win.
Yes, and it's all these statements about consistently following it that lead me to produce these counterexamples, because I'm trying to make you back off and say, actually not. Sometimes we shouldn't do it. I want you to say, sometimes it is totally wrong to do the efficient thing, and I will advise people, no, do not do it. That is, yes, it's efficient, and it's absolutely wrong. Don't do it.
So this is the whole point of following a rule. The whole point of consistently following a rule is there are advantages to consistency that outweigh the disadvantages of that in particular cases you might think you're wrong. So, for example, especially for advisors. Advisors who are trying to collect a reputation for being trustworthy, trying to collect a reputation for being believable and neutral, often find it in their interest appropriately to consistently follow rules about how they give their advice so that they can be credibly believed to be neutral. And this is exactly that sort of a case. I'd say, I don't want to be making exceptions for this or that. I want to find a simple, consistent rule that I can follow as an advisor so that my package of advice is a good package.
This all sounds very nice until you actually consider the facts, Robin. So, what exactly is it doing for your reputation when you make these strange claims about the Holocaust or cannibalism? I think it's hurting your reputation. I don't think it leads people to trust you or to consider you to be a better advisor. At least people think you're crazy.
If I'm looking for an advisor, and if I have an advisor that says I consistently follow this rule, I consistently, for example, do it. If I have a financial advisor or a hedge fund or something, and they say we consistently invest in order to make money for you, I'd say that's good. If they say we consistently invest in order to make money for you, except when we kind of feel it should be an exception, and I don't have some other track record to go on, I'm going to say, then you kind of worry about me, right? Or if you have a judge who says I will consistently implement and follow the law, follow the letter of the law, and I will judge my cases based on the law. Or you have another judge that says, I'll usually do that, but if I feel like doing it otherwise, then I'll do something else. And I can't tell you exactly when I'll feel or how often or what cases. I'll just won't follow the law when I feel like not following the law. That's a judge I don't trust as much.
I would like to see what kinds of exceptions it makes. Right? So if there's an investment fund, it turns out that they are investing money in the North Korean state security technology to keep people from fleeing the country. I would say, no, that's actually a very good reason for me not to go with you, even if it is paying a high return, because that's a monstrous thing to be putting my money into. I don't want to be any part of it. And no one should.
But tracking a long list of exceptions and judging whether or not a long list of exceptions is an appropriate list is a lot more work than just monitoring a simple rule and following it, right? So if I'm an auto repair guy and I say, here's a rule I want you to follow, right? Calculate my expected future repairs in the car. Do this repair if that will reduce it. Don't do it if it won't, right? If I had an auto repair guy that I could trust to do that, that would be hard. But it's a simple rule. If I don't consider, let me give you a dollar amount for time that I don't have the car, and then I'll expect to keep the car for 10 years, and then you calculate the cost of each repair, and I want you to, update the transmission or, change the brake pads. All those decisions, I want you to just follow the simple rule of minimizing my expected future expenses of managing this car. Now, I would like that if they say, yeah, I'll usually do that, but then sometimes I won't, and then they start giving me a long list of exceptions that I don't see much of a pattern in, I'm going to feel a little uncomfortable.
I think there is a pattern to the exceptions that I'm mentioning, but in any case, you have this odd fetish for rules as a matter of this argument, which I don't even see you using in real life. I do all kinds of things with you, Robin. We have some rules that we use. Oftentimes we bend or break those rules, and things are better because we do that. And so you say, look, we're not going to go and drive more than 15 minutes for lunch. Well, there's this really good place. It's only open a day. It's 16 minutes. You don't go and give me a big speech about how rules are really important and how if we don't use rules, who knows what's going to happen.
You don't have to like that. Would be a good idea.
We got a lot of rules. All right, fine. Here's the rule. During the summer games, gaming time begins at noon on Thursday. All right. Now, if I were to say, hey, how about this day we go and make it 12:05? Again, I don't get the giant speech about how we have to follow rules. Because rules are what separates us from the animals. Blah blah blah.
It's not all rules just always following rules. It's about when you're trying to be trusted by suspicious outsiders who are trying to. Social scientists, I don't know if any of you noticed, and ever talk to a non-social scientist about social science, they often are pretty skeptical about the whole idea. I was in physics before I came into social science, and the modal theory of physics was just social scientists know nothing. There's nothing they know. If you just think off the top of your head for a few minutes and pop an idea in your head, that's as good as anything they've got because they know nothing, right? So in the face of a world that thinks we know nothing, that our advice is completely useless, we're trying to cut in and say, no, we do know some things. We can help you out. If only you would listen to us. And when they grant maybe that we know something, then the next step is, yeah, but you're all in the pockets of those people, right? You're sold, you're corrupted by government advisors, you're corrupted by government funding in the universities, or you're paid by the corporations, et cetera, and they refuse to believe our advice because they think we wouldn't be honest with them about advice. And so that's the next big step, is to try to carve out a way in which we can commit ourselves to being clear and being straightforward and not, and being trustworthy.
You keep talking about the effects of winning people's trust as if there's soon to be some massive effect as long as we say what you say. Maybe one person in a million will trust us more, possibly, although I actually think we'd be much less trusted if we were to go and make these strange claims about in Holocaust, cannibalism, etc. So again,
I don't actually bring up Holocaust as cannibalism when I'm usually talking to people about it. I know
it was brought up about
something I volunteered.
Brought up about you. Well, you volunteered your views on it, but in any case, we keep talking about the benefits of following rules without any effort to really empirically estimate how big are these benefits. I say these benefits are no small, and they're probably actually negative. And then in order to get this dubious benefit, we have to go and say a bunch of things that are crazy. Why?
So, Robin, why does it turn out that Brian's issues are really about these boundary conditions of death and torture? I mean, is there an easy carve-out you could get where you could just say, well, economic models of efficiency are things where you deal with people who already start off ex ante with, a decent level of human dignity using sort of rights-based.
Many people who are willing to listen to economists do carve us that way. So, for example, the first cut is, well, anything dealing with money, I guess you guys know something about that. Economists know about money in the business cycle. And everything else you don't know anything about, but you at least know about that, right? And then going beyond that, you can get people to say, well, I guess you know about stuff when it's like ordinary food and clothes and cars, and just kind of things that we like but isn't really important. But when it gets to health, or when it gets to, truth or something like that, well, economists got to set aside their advice. You can't trust them on that because that's something really important. And in all those cases, I think that's a mistake. I think continuing to bite the bullet, continuing to take the economist's advice is valuable much farther down the line than most people are willing to go.
I'll agree with that.
Okay, so a running theme here seems to be that it sounds to me like your story sounds very much like Buchanan Tulloch's calculus and consent story about the Constitution, which is that people are standing behind some kind of veil and there's a rough kind of level of ignorance. And so in such a setting, when they'll behave kind of utilitarian, partly because they know their situation will change from time to time. It's similar to Rawls' story, similar to Hayek's story about building an institution. And your story is very similar to Austrian stories that put a lot of focus on individual liberty. So this is sort of Austrianism versus public choice writ large, or writ small.
I don't know about that. I mean, I think that a philosopher like Rawls, he actually at least admits, well, sure, in the real world, people know all kinds of things that would lead them to know that some policies are better for them. Really, what Robin is trying to do is to act as if the real world is this philosophical construction that we don't actually know what policies will personally benefit us and which ones will not. Now, again, of course, he's right that to some extent, sometimes this averaging process actually works out. But when I take a look, a lot of times it doesn't. So if you look at the U.S. Constitution, there's some interesting provisions in there that rather than being written behind a veil of ignorance, seem to be written by people who say, hey, I know my situation here, I have a good thing going, and I want to lock it in for all time. I want to make sure we keep slavery, because I'm not a slave, and I know it. So I'm going to put it in to make sure that slavery is protected. So it seems like that's actually the situation we're in, where people often have information where they know what policies are going to benefit them, even over a very long run. So you can't just go and say things will all average out, and then everyone is going to be better off if we do the efficient policy.
It's interesting to hear Brian here as a defender of the knowledge of ordinary people and their access to the details of ordinary situations to understand the consequences of their behavior. Because, of course, in other contexts, you emphasize the ignorance.
There are subtle mistakes, and there are blatant ones, yes. Is a slave owner better off if slavery stays around? Sure. It doesn't take a lot of reasoning to figure it out.
Now, Brian, what you're doing, though, there is you're swapping positive with normative distinction. You're saying, anybody would agree that people at the Constitutional Convention who knew which were slave owners and which weren't. But this is a normative claim that we should, an as-if assumption that economists giving advice should act as if we were going to switch to a...
Actually, I want to be clear about this. So, in a situation where people know their stakes, the efficiency criteria just applies differently because it's relative to their initial status quo and relative to their knowledge about what they can do. So let's just be clear about what I mean by efficiency. Efficiency is estimating the value to each person of each policy alternative, given what you think they know about their circumstances, and given the actual status quo reference that's likely to happen, that they expect to happen if the deal isn't made. So this certainly allows for including whatever people know about their circumstance. The way in which the economist and analyst will go wrong, most fundamentally, is that the people will know things about themselves that the analyst doesn't know. So, for example, in an ordinary supply and demand circumstance, each person knows their demand for the product or their cost of supplying it, whereas other people don't know those things. whereas the analyst doesn't. So the economist can go wrong in misjudging details of people's preferences. But we're just talking about the but it certainly can take into account everything you know about the average situation. So if you have 1,000 situations, then the scenario is in each situation the economists misjudge their value, and that adds up to some total terrible mistake. Even though on average people were benefiting, somehow you just consistently made a mistake, and that's what seems implausible to me.
Yeah, so just for clarification, Robin, my understanding is that you aren't doing as if. You don't want to pretend that people know less than they are, know less than they do, and then figure out what would be efficient if they didn't know as much as they do. You actually want to tell them to do what's efficient given what they know.
Yeah.
Yes, so the mistake that Garrett is accusing me is not, at least that is not the mistake they're making.
And I want to do transfers when possible to compensate for losses. So it's only the issue of when transfers become expensive or when there's large amounts of uncertainty that you have to accept averaging over a longer set of cases in order to get
you don't have to. There's nothing, no particular reason to do the transfers.
Yes, there is.
So what's the reason?
So that you can more assure yourself that everybody's winning. You're trying to increase the probability that everybody gains, and transfers are a way to do that. You can't guarantee that everybody gains.
But every time there's a transfer, there's some transaction cost of doing it. Inefficient have the transaction costs. You can save on those by not doing it.
If the alternative is you don't do deals at all and you fight or you do some status quo, and this is the way to get people to sign in, then this is what you do to get them to sign in.
But now you're recommending some kind of constrained efficiency standard rather than just do the most efficient thing.
So I have a question for Brian.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm interested to know of the situations where you would agree that efficiency trumps liberty. So, for example, presumably if the asteroid is coming towards the Earth and will wipe out civilization, you would agree to a tax. What though about national defense? What though about welfare or charity? So when are the conditions under which efficiency would trump liberty? What's the metric by which you would make that decision?
I think I simply said I don't have any mathematical formula. I would just have to discuss it case by case, and I don't think any reasonable person does anything else. There are examples like welfare where I would go and say, look, welfare is actually our main argument for having immigration restrictions, and the people that we're keeping out are actually poor. So if you're concerned about poverty, rather we would get rid of the welfare state and let in a bunch of immigrants. So then I'd say actually liberty is recommending something that shows much greater concern for poor people around the world. So I mean that's a case where I would say that there's a pretty easy answer, despite the great controversy about it. On the case of national defense, again, I would say it depends upon what kinds of threats you're actually facing and whether or not your country is likely to do harm to other countries. Something that should always be kept in mind.
So here's the key different question, which is not what would you do if you were king, but if you were trying to convince other people that you had sound advice on the question, do you see any benefit in constraining your behavior, your analysis, your process in any way to convince them that you're a reliable source? Do you just say, I'm Brian Caplan, and here's my advice, and if you don't like it, stuff it? Or are you willing to join a community of people who have constrained themselves to some set of practices which we think engender trust?
It's a false alternative, Robin. How about this? I don't have to join a community of people who do something. I can just say, hey, so there's some people over there talking about efficiency. I'll go talk with efficiency about them. We'll talk with them about efficiency too. But in so doing, I don't go and I don't give them some blank check that efficiency is the only thing that counts, or we should always do that. And so if you want to know how do I talk to people when I want to convince them, look at my book. So I wrote my book to try to be convincing to a wide range of people. I didn't want to just write a book for libertarians to read. And so that's what I do. I go and make arguments that are true and which will be convincing to people who have different starting points, and that's fine. However, that isn't actually my fundamental view. Right? And it seems to me that your fundamental view is that's all there is.
So if we have a committee or a group of 100 economists analyzing the asteroid question, we're supposed to make a report which declares our summary opinion on the asteroid question. You agree we would probably use this typical efficiency analysis for at least a few of the paragraphs of that final report. Now the question is, do each person need each of the 100 people, should they have another paragraph to explain how their personal intuitions differ in this case, or are you willing to sign on to the report without this extra paragraph explaining her differing opinion?
I don't put my name on things I don't agree with, Robin, so of course not. I might go and blog saying, hey, the first 3 paragraphs are fine. Looks like they've done good work there. Stale, it seems like it's not worth doing.
What about you? Will you join us? Will you join a group of people in trying to create a set of trustworthy advice? Will you set aside your own personal momentary intuitions to join a larger group in offering advice to somebody so that you could be believed and trusted?
It's a very strange question you were asking, Robin. If you go to Roman's webpage, on the main page it says that he is not a joiner. So now he is bothering me to be a joiner. No, I'm not joining Roman. I'm going to maintain my intellectual independence. I'm going to say what I think about individual issues. And I'm not, if other people want to join with me, that's fine. But,
Can you see nobility in other people joining a group for this purpose? Can you at least see the point of that, even if it's not something that
I understand
to your personality?
I understand what they're trying to accomplish. I will object that, first of all, it's not clear that they're going to succeed. Now, as I said, I think that many of the things you're saying are undermining your credibility and are not going to win you any friends, so you might as well just stop saying them. If it's just a matter of trying to win friends and influence people.
You're saying these things, not me, right? I was never talking about Nazis and cannibals, right? You want to find that in my writings when I write about economics.
You did talk about Nazis. directly from conversation. Yes.
So Brian, but it sounds like when you actually talk about real-world policy questions, you tend to use efficiency criteria in your discussion. It's not like, and if you use liberty, it sounds like liberty is part of that efficiency. Well, people value liberty, therefore it's part of what you should kind of get added into the pile of weighing the costs and benefits.
Yeah. Inefficiency is a possible reason why it would be a good idea to not respect liberty. But that doesn't mean that I could use that as a criterion. Quite the opposite. Like I said, in many cases where there's trillions of dollars of loss in consumer surplus, and they'll still say don't do it. Or you'll still say do the thing that loses the consumer surplus because we wind up trampling on the rights of a person for no good reason. The fact that a bunch of people hate some other people and want to kill them doesn't seem like a good reason to do it, even if they do put a high level of discipline on it.
Sure. Let me take a question. Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then maybe just one, and then start taking questions from the audience. I'll come around with the microphone. So first, suppose that each of you has your preferred society with, say, about 1 million people in it. So you've solved some kind of scale problems. People are watching your country for a while. There's Effichistan over here, and there's Libertopia over here. Okay, you've got your two countries. People have been watching it for a few years. Say 5 years they've been watching it. News reports, it gets covered relatively fairly by the global media. Over the next 10 years, which country will get more immigrants?
I think you need a 50-year track record. 5-year track record isn't going to be your track record.
Okay. Answer it as you will, and then answer it as you will. Where will people want to live?
Given enough time, Effichistan, enough time for the benefits to accrue. I don't think the abstract principles are going to appeal to people. I think it would be the consequences of following policy.
Robin's probably right. I don't think it would be a huge difference, but I think that, for example, parents who don't want their kids to use drugs would rather go to Effichistan, where someone will say, hey, we've done the cost-benefit analysis, and parents value their kids not using drugs by way more than the kids value using the drugs, so we're going to keep prohibition here. Right? And over in Liberty Stand, they say, hey, your child is an adult, they can do what they want, even if you don't like it, and even if you're going to pay them more. Right? Or of course, if you want to offer to pay them, fine, but if that doesn't work out, we're not doing anything about it.
Okay, great. Well, that's the Tibu vote then. So 2 Tibu votes for Effichistan. All right, any questions from the audience? I can come around and please state your name. Come up to the back there.
Hey, well, you know me, so I'm good. We'll cover that anyway, because you asked me to. My question is actually for Brian. I'm curious on if we consider this scenario where there's 1 trillion Nazis and 1 million Jews, and the Jews knowing that they will be killed by the Nazis based on efficiency standards, wouldn't they arm themselves to prevent that? And knowing that, wouldn't the Nazis prevent that? Or wouldn't the Nazis arm themselves? And then the Jews would arm themselves knowing that. And eventually you get a war, which we know is tremendously inefficient. So it turns out that maybe liberty is a good idea, not because liberty is this great fuzzy thing, but liberty actually prevents inefficiencies in other ways. Liberty is just the most efficient way to do things.
Oftentimes you're right. However, like in the specific case of the Holocaust, that didn't happen that way.
Well, because they thought that they would be libertarian, this idea of liberty and private property protected, and it wasn't. So
well, for a while they thought that, and then they started to think, I'd like to get the hell out of this country before they kill me, and then they said, oh my God, they're not letting us leave, and I can't buy a gun, and what am I going to do now?
Yeah, so we had a system where the least efficient institution was in place, where they did not respect private property.
You did. I would say so that institution in general is more efficient. Although it depends upon the preferences. So we have a lot of people who are extremely hateful, and a small minority that is hated and doesn't have a lot of assets to buy them off. That efficiency recommends doing terrible things to them.
But knowing that, then they would respond, and you get the entanglement.
Again, so.
You
go into the game theory of it. Sometimes when people feel threatened, they will go and try to fight back. Other times, though, they will just say, hey, maybe if I just keep my head down, I can get through this. So what people do.
I feel safe saying that in the real world, most of the time when we've had liberty, it's because real people thought that liberty would get them what they want. That is, people chose to support liberty of various forms because they thought liberty would help get them what they wanted, and that's, in a sense, an efficiency standard. They chose liberty to get efficiency. That is, they had conflicts where different people wanted different things, and they made a move to do something that would get them what they wanted, and other people allowed it to happen because it gave many people what they wanted.
Again, to say that things in the real world happen because they are what people want is not very informative. However, if you were to go and add on, sometimes what people want is affected by more reasoning, then I can say that is actually where what I'm saying would wind up having an effect in the real world is people may say, you know what, it's wrong to go and kill someone just because his religion is different from yours, so we should stop doing that. And it seems that your approach of just advising people given what they've already got, winds up implicitly saying, hey, whatever you already think is okay.
One of the things people want is to be moral. To the extent that people want to be moral, then we advise them to be moral, because that gets them what they want.
Right. However, what if you wanted to change someone's views about what was moral? What if someone is there saying, what I want is to go and kill those heretics because I hate them and heretics should die?
When I hire an advisor and I say, I want to minimize my cost on the car, I don't want the car to repair coming back and saying, no, that's not what you really want. Let me try to convince you of something else. I say, that's not what I want in an advisor. I've got an advisor. I say, I want you to do this for me because this is what I want. I want them to help me get what I said I want.
Yes, and it's true that the people burning the heretics generally don't appreciate criticism either. Nevertheless, I don't see why one wouldn't do it if you could get away with it. Seems like you wouldn't do it even if you could get away with it, even if you were encased in a special bubble that protected you from
Well, I at least have to take my economist hat off.
Yeah. What is the deal with this economist hat anyway? I don't have an economist hat on Brian all the time.
We'll get you.
Yes.
All right, we'll take another question here.
Hi, my name is Ryan, and my question is for Dr. Hanson. A moment ago when we spoke about the meteorite example, you used that as an example where we would need taxes to solve that crisis, but...
That was actually Alex.
Oh, sorry. But I think you did mention that we would need some sort of tax there. But it seems like that with the imminent death situation, free riding wouldn't really be a problem. So it seems like liberty would kind of solve that. Do you still think that example holds as efficiency argument?
I was accepting it as a premise that was given to me by Alex, but certainly I do think there are many real situations where free riding holds and people die because of it. There is real free riding and death. I mean, this one example was the old city-states of Europe. They had a lot of liberty in the city-states, and they eventually pissed off the local nations, and the nations came around one by one and took over the city-states. The city-states just never managed to coordinate together to resist and they became assimilated. It just failed coordinating.
I agree with that.
Hi, I'm Dallas Stauffer. This is for you, Professor Hanson. I wasn't here at the first part, so you may have answered this. A simple criticism of the efficiency argument would be that it's hard to value the subjective. So the values are subjective, so it would be hard to find a way to measure the cost and benefit. What would you respond to that?
So that's the wonder of economics. So from a distance, people say, this is impossible. The idea of doing social science and weighing people's values of things and coming up with some net estimates is crazy. How could you possibly see these things? And one of the marvels of social science is we have figured out how to make progress on these things. Not that we can always do it in every circumstance, but we have ways to carve it and cut it out so that we can actually make substantial progress on these things. Where we can say, a supply restriction, a quantity restriction in an ordinary market reduces welfare even if we can't identify each person's cost or benefit in that market. That's because we found out ways to cut out the problem that tells us things. So, but we should also be honest about our uncertainty. That's the whole point. To say, well, we estimate this, but we are not sure this much, and to tell when we are really sure.
Question from our colleague Dan Klein.
Hi guys, where you go?
Yeah.
It sounds like you're both offering sort of maxims, rules of thumbs. It seems like neither of you are asserting that your respective banner up there is some sort of ethical trump or supreme. Is that correct?
Yep.
I disagree with what Robin says he's saying.
That's not what I asked.
That's right.
All right, and actually that wasn't what I walked in here expecting. And I actually expected to kind of agree more with Robin and disagree more with Brian. But given that you're actually offering sort of maxims, first rules of thumbs, and not ethical supremes or trumps, so you both kind of see that there's sort of beyond your maxims some vague notion of the desirable, right, out there, right? Which these are sort of good rules of thumbs to approximate or to approach.
So I resist the desirable. I see there are many desirables that many individuals have, whether there's a single unifying one that encompasses them all. That's not me.
Okay, but if you were the one making choices in crucial situations, you would push certain buttons.
I would choose.
Not with your economist hat, just with
I
your
would just
Robin.
choose, yeah.
Just
I would
as
choose.
Robin.
I would get what I want.
And let's assume that there's a sort of consistency or coherence to that set of pushings of buttons. So that's, in some sense, the desirable in your mind.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, Robin, if it's just a maxim for you, why do you bite every bullet I give you? Normally, someone who has maxim will say, oh yeah, by the way, the exceptions are these. You won't give me any exceptions. Doesn't seem like a maxim to me.
Maybe I like it more than I realize.
My only comment is that I think that Robin is pointing to efficiency as some kind of cogent maxim a lot more than it really is. I think efficiency itself is terribly loose, vague, and indeterminate. And the idea that, gee, I want to, Robin, that we should build up economists' reputation by, honestly and faithfully and unbiasedly pursuing and declaring efficiency, I think is a very illusory notion, because there are so many dimensions in some kind of efficiency calculation that there is no focal solution of all these dimensions and problems, whereas liberty, I think, is very focal, quite focal, and really does work as a maxim. So I think you're kind of pursuing some kind of economist's identity or economist vision, Robin, which, I really don't think is viable.
Well, so for an analyst who is given a complicated problem and asked to analyze it in order to make recommendations about it, the liberty maxim sort of doesn't give them much to do, right? They just figure out what the liberty options are, they label them that way, and they walk away. So an analyst needs some other, if a group of analysts is going to have some common referent that coordinates their activities, it's going to have to be more than that, right?
No, they can coordinate around liberty, they just won't get that much employment.
Well, they don't have much to do either.
So?
Well, I think we can do better. I think we can analyze situations and understand them better than simply applying. I said liberty is the best heuristic I know, right? You're going to have one simple, easy to apply heuristic across policy. It's the best one. So then I just say, is there any point in ever doing anything else than just applying this one simple heuristic? I say yes. Thinking about situations in more detail often gives you an understanding of it and gives you a basis for giving advice that goes beyond just applying a heuristic.
Hi, I have a question. With the futurarchy, would you say that in a futurarchy society, which obviously supports efficiency, a Holocaust or something like this, an extreme would ever happen?
So for reference for the rest of the people, futurarchy is a form of government that I've proposed where embedding markets would tell you how to get what you want, and then the legislature would have to agree on what they want, some sort of measure of what they want as an outcome. That outcome doesn't have to actually equal efficiency, but I predict it would get pretty close as a matter of practice. So we're postulating a form of government where they've agreed on some measure of what's a good outcome. And let's say it's a measure that agrees with efficiency. There would be many that would agree, but it would be one. and they've got betting markets to tell them how to get it. And so then in the hypothetical scenario of 1 trillion Nazis and 1 million Jews, futarchy looks like it would say, according to the assumptions that he's given, I'm not sure if those are true, it would in fact violate liberty in that case. So what was, you have a particular scenario to?
Well, just in general, because the extreme scenarios seem to be more interesting, obviously. The prediction market, right, you think that they're efficient in general, right, rather than, but they might violate liberty.
So the idea of this futarchy is that you just agree on some measure of what's the good, some numerical, something that you can, after the fact, measure a number saying how good was our history, how good were things. And betting markets tell you how to achieve that good. Whatever policies will achieve it, they will recommend it, even if it seems horrible. And if the betting markets say do a horrible thing to achieve what you said was a good, then you're supposed to go back and change your measure of the good, so you make sure you include the things you had forgotten, so that you're now in some sort of reflective equilibrium. But if in fact you can't figure out how to change what you want, and it says to do something to get it, then you do it. And yes, that doesn't have to be always liberty. I would think, in general, on average, it would be liberty. I would actually think libertarians should support futarchy because, in fact, conditional on futarchy being, they would have a pretty libertarian society compared to the status quo. That would be my claim, but it wouldn't be absolutely libertarian. But it would be pretty.
I would have pushed Robin a little bit more on this whole advisor thing. Right, so, I hate to keep beating the whole Nazi stick, but I have to. All right, so it's widely believed that when someone goes and does something horrible and then offers defense, I was just following orders. It's not really a very good defense. Right? It seems like you have constructed even stranger defense, which is only giving advice. I'm only advising you to go and kill people. I'm not saying you should, or I don't want to do it. I'm just advising you to do it. It seems very odd, really. What is this advisor hat that allows you to say these horrible things without any responsibility? I just don't get it.
So I actually do a lot of economic consulting. I'm known to be an expert in the prediction market area. I'm hired often by companies. I reject some clients. I feel entitled to reject a client. I don't have to consult for everybody if I don't want to. I don't think my rejecting a client biases my advice to other clients. I think that's a safer way that you can be discretionary because saying, no, I just don't want to help you, you're not a client that I want to help, doesn't send much of a signal about how my advice is going to be distorted if I did say, yes, I will help you. If I say, yes, I will help you, then I think I am trying to sort of do the obvious, neutral, reasonable advisor thing that I don't have to help. I can just say, no, I don't want to. So, for example, I typically reject government consulting contract, not because I object to the government, because they rarely actually do anything. They just like to have a long discussion and a white paper and maybe a study, and I just want to be involved in the project, but they actually do something, so you can learn something from that. So can I just not always take all clients? But when I take a client, I present a faithful, consistent, neutral advisor persona.
So would you consider, suppose you had a client who was truly awful, you could go and mislead him in order to not be so awful. Would you consider that to be horribly wrong and you should never do it?
Well, I would certainly say that I would never do it. That's the whole point. If I was ever going to go lie to people in order to deceive them, I want to say up front that I would never do such a thing, right? That would make it more effective.
So this gives us, so we shouldn't actually believe some of the stuff you told us then. Because you may just be
Should we believe everything you told us?
Yes.
Because you haven't said that you might lie?
Yeah. You should just believe me. That's it.
You should think about whether you lie.
Just think about it and then accept that I didn't lie.
Because it's impossible.
All right.
Hello, I'd like to propose a use case scenario for each of you so that we can compare and contrast your answers. So the question for each of you, although I'll ask Caplan first. I'll just be hand waving and make it somewhat simple. Let's say 20 years before the Civil War, a question comes up about slavery, how to handle that problem. Let's assume both of you or each of you would be a respected economist of the day, and you're advising the president on what policy we could do or how we could change, or, some policy recommendations for this. How would each of you handle the situation?
That's my understanding is that the historians' calculations say it would have in fact been cheaper just to buy out the slave owners. And well, that's certainly, in terms of compensating people for their losses, this is a relatively low bar, easy thing, right? You say, the whole problem is, can we identify the losers and figure out how much they're going to lose in order to compensate them? Well, we had a whole liquid market in these slaves where we could price these slaves. So the obvious thing to do is use those market prices, buy them out, and end slavery that way. If in fact the taxpayers were willing to pay that price to make it happen, of course.
Well, let's think in this case, the slaves don't pay taxes per se, so they can't buy their freedom.
No, it would have to be other people who.
Would you say that maybe the slaves could buy their freedom by paying their future wages, perhaps?
Maybe we could buy their freedom in order to enslave them for long.
Yeah.
I guess under better circumstances, that would be better opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to say it's better to go and buy slavers off than to kill 1 million people in a civil war. Although I will still say what you should do is not only free the slaves without compensation, but the slave owners should have had to pay compensation themselves, including the reduced the slave rate in many cases. That's what should be done.
But you shouldn't do award it.
That's right. Yes. Very often it is wrong to try to achieve the best outcome because you have to go and do wrong things in order to get there. When you're in that situation, you just have to put up with what you got.
So you would advise the should be scenarios, right? So Caplan would advise a should be solution, whereas Hanson, you basically would advise buying slaves out in some fashion.
Apparently we agree on what we should have done.
Yeah.
Somehow there's some kind of factual world where we disagree about in some other scenario what we should have done next. But in the actual world, we seem to agree.
Right. I mean, I probably wouldn't have been advising the president at all. I would have just been writing about how we abolish slavery.
Well, then your name wouldn't be on our 100-signature report that suggested the president that they ran out the slaves.
That is correct. My name would not be on the report. I can live with that.
All right. My name is Peter. I have a question for Dr. Caplan. It's been fun watching everyone poke at Dr. Hanson a bit, but it seems kind of whenever Brian is challenged on something, he can just wave his hands and say, I believe in liberty except when I don't. And I'm wondering if you can kind of describe how you ground these moral beliefs. Do you consider yourself a moral realist? Is this intuitionism? Is it a motivism? Or it's not, classic liberal deontology? So I'm just wondering if you can.
Sure. Yes. So yes, it is a form of moral realism. If you're interested in getting the fundamental view I have, there's a great essay written by my friend, philosopher Michael Huber called Moral Objectivism, which has nothing to do with that grant. It's just thinking that there are right and wrong answers to moral questions. So that's where I go. But beginning, mainly in terms of how I ground things by beginning with simple, obvious, concrete cases, and then I go from there. And if someone says, what makes it so obvious? That's what I'll say, that's it, it's obvious. I don't have anything more to tell you. I'm not going to trick you and pretend that I have some giant additional argument for why it's morally wrong to kill people. So I see that as a virtue of my position, that I don't make up phony, complicated reasons for stuff that isn't actually the reason.
And if you were facing a complicated situation and needed to get third-party advice about what to do, to whom would you go?
Probably do it myself.
Nothing is so complicated you couldn't figure it out yourself.
It would be my first step anyway. So, what kinds of situations are you thinking about? So, if I'm looking to launch a rocket, I'll go to you. But,
so you're running a company. Thinking of changing the health plan, right? Changing the employment contract.
Right, so I'm running a company, so I already say, look, contractually it's okay for me to have any number of different health insurance plans, so then it's okay to go to an advisor and tell me what the cheapest way to do that is. That's fine.
So Brian, just as a quick follow-up, if you're given a moral proposition, what's the process by which you accept or reject it? Do you just think, this feels wrong to me, or something like that? Or
I would say, I think that it's wrong. I wouldn't say I feel, but
is it just it appears in your head or something?
I think about it and say, look, is that wrong? Yes, it's wrong. No, it's not. Or say, look, I don't know. It's a complicated question. I can think about it some more. I admit that many people find it unsatisfactory. What I'll tell you is there's nothing better anywhere. However, there are many things that are worse, which is someone saying, well, look, the reason why you should kill people is because, first of all, it's the nature of man upon man to be rational, and a rational being would never want to harm another, plus there's no conflicts of interest anyway, and then you come up with a whole bunch of statements, all of which are wrong, and then it ends with, therefore don't kill people. Right? That I don't do.
All right, Brian, time about 2 more questions. One more question, then we'll hand out the final ballots. Please give your name for
Yes, another first kind of question to Professor Hanson about the advising theory that they talking about the economics they should do. In case this advising is towards some policymaker instead of only some person, and in the case the advising is to a policymaker when you are advising how to make a deal, which although does not involve only the policymaker, but then the decision of the policymaker will involve maybe thousands of people. Then how would you consider the democratic institutions that will enter, in that case, the follows of the decision of the policymaker? Because in that case, you might give advice to the policymaker, but the policymaker should impose his decision anyhow on the society. And in that case, your advice will go only not only one person, but through the decisions of the policymakers to many thousands of people. In that case, how would you consider how thousands of people would accept the decision and what would look at efficiency? For example, how would you suggest in a moment like this, for example, when the U.S. economy is losing jobs, and in a moment like this, when this is happening only also because of the competition with foreign better producers of automobiles or anything else, that free trade is better. How would you suggest that the efficiency says that the free trade is better, and how would you suggest that as a truth, not only to the policymaker, but also to thousands of people?
So I guess there's two components. I think he's asked several questions there. So there's one: how do I feel about advising a dictator almost, or a person who has a lot of discretion, as opposed to advising a group? And then you're also saying, how do I advise? How would I express the idea that free trade is good in an auto-regulatory context? Again, I'm painting this picture of, instead of simply looking at something and using all my judgment and discretion and intuition to say what I think is the most likely thing I would choose if I were king, I constrain myself to follow to be part of a community that follows a set of accepted standard procedures in order to calculate things that we can assure ourselves better that we are together doing the same thing, such that it's still a useful thing to be doing if white people listen. So the whole idea here is, because we're trying to become trustworthy by constraining ourselves, we would like to develop a reputation ourselves for this advice, and we would be happy if other people seek to develop a reputation for following our advice. It would be great. It is often great if regulators feel that instead of making an arbitrary choice on their own, they want to advertise that their choice is in fact the one the economists recommend. That's great. If the reputation of our neutral, effective advice is gone so far as people win elections by creating regulators who tell everybody that they're following our advice. I love that. That's wonderful. If, of course, they are actually following our advice, if they are only claiming to follow our advice but doing something else, I want us to call them on that, point it out, and yell and scream that they are not, in fact, doing what we advise. They're just trying to take our good name and use it up, okay? But if I'm one of their advisors, then I want to continue this reputation game. I want to do what another economist would respect as telling them what the efficient outcome is. I want to not prejudge that. I want to not say it's necessarily free trade until I've analyzed it. I might expect it to be, but I still want to do a fair job of analyzing it, decide what my recommendation is, tell it to them and say, I think most economists would agree with me that this is the thing that increases efficiency. I want them to then have that advice and be faced the choice to ignore it. We can yell at them they're not doing the economist thing, or follow it and say they're doing the economist thing, in which case we're increasing this great, wonderful thing of creating a reputation in a world where people listen to economists. Final word? Good. All right.
I'll let Renee go.